What's good? What's good? Hey, good to have everybody back to another live stream. Have Talk Politics on the show where you don't just listen to the news, but to help make it. We appreciate your participation. Thanks to the various people out there who have contributed their support. Thank you, Chris, Monica, Pete, Matthew, Liz, Bill, and Matt. Your support is greatly appreciated. In the meantime, we're just hanging out in the chat. What's going on? Let me know if you're here. Just put a one in the chat. Well, wait. As people come in or don't come in, either way, I'm happy to get started. Happy to share the show with this great live audience. Meantime, man, what's in your mind? We're eager to hear from you. We are going to continue on what it is that we normally do, Pulse of the People, along with national news and nonsense, and we will conclude from there. You guys are in or not? Send a one if you're listening. If not, hey, we can always do something else. It's up to you. But hey, we're just going to keep it rolling. What do you guys think of the latest news with Trump? Apparently, I'm either being shadow banned or nobody's on. But the latest news about Trump will not debate. What do you guys think about that? You guys happy about it? Not happy? Enthused? Not enthused? Let me know. But right now, hey, we're waiting for y'all to get here. Coming in. Let me just remind y'all what it is that we do on the show. And hey, thanks for joining, new viewer. Happy to have you on. If you are listening, make sure to drop a one in the chat. Hey, equally as stupid as Democrats not hosting primary debates. That's right. That's what it is that I thought. I thought that people were against basement campaigning. Apparently not. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. A little bit of hypocrisy seeming to go on right there. So yeah, hey, we'll get to that. We'll cover a lot going on with Tucker, big fake news, all that jazz. But in the meantime, if you're listening, also share what topic you're interested in talking about, and we'll go ahead and cover that too. And depending on the turnout, hey, perhaps we'll wrap up early if we're not going to have a lot of people in. Up to you. So at the same time, it's just a huge waste of time to have debates with candidates polling at 1% just for book deals. Yeah, that's for sure. I think the biggest thing that we can do to combat that or to limit that is for the party to just disallow candidates that are polling so low to even be on the debate stage to start with, right? I mean, obviously, some candidates should have an opportunity sometime, but to just allow as many candidates as possible, that's not responsible. In fact, there should probably be some sort of bylaw that if you run in a presidential primary and you poll under 10%, then you should be prohibited from running. Just so that way we're able to get better candidates. Yeah, well, hey, I guess we'll get to it. We only got 2 people on tonight. So it goes. Looks like, just looks like it is what it is. So we'll get to it and go with Pulse the People. Most of the people, we're talking about what it is that you guys are talking about right now. Hey, we're talking about Rupert Murdoch, the guy in Kentucky who wants to break up big tech so more people watch more news. And I ask that because when we talk about breaking up big tech, we are talking about television companies using their media influence to encourage people to do something that it doesn't seem like most people like doing. So I asked, do you support using the government to break up big tech in order to further enrich Mr. Murdoch? Most people said no. So it's interesting. Most people in this survey said no. And meanwhile, they will still publicly call to break up big tech. The government is not in the same area it was when Trump ran last for president. If he was smart, he would debate so that people can hear his plan. Regardless of liking a candidate or not, debating is necessary so all citizens can hear all candidates. Americans should hear from all candidates. Yeah, that's 100% true. It's kind of asinine to not, right? I mean, how the heck are we going to have any idea of where somebody is, what they want to do differently, what their vision for the future is if they refuse to debate? Now, Trump has said that he's going to have CNN-style town halls instead of debating. Well, I guess that's good to hear from people in that way, but it's hard to believe that candidates are going to be pressed as hard. Hey, thanks you for joining. Thanks for coming on the show. We're talking about two things. We're kind of going back and forth here. One was we were talking about Rupert Murdoch and wanting to break up big tech so more people watch news, and then we were also talking about the Republican presidential debate or the lack thereof. And the first one's scheduled for August, and apparently Trump does not want to do it. So we were talking about that, but I wanted to talk about breaking up big tech because after Tucker Carlson, hey Mark, good to hear from you. Glad to have you back in the chat here. You know, they get a lot of stuff going on, but hey, awesome having you. But anyhow, Tucker Carlson was canned from Fox News, and then he used quote unquote big tech in using Twitter to get videos that had a reach of 7 million people. So, you know, does that affect conservatives thinking about that or whomever? And what I try to suggest is that the idea to break up big tech is something of an underhanded move by Republicans to expand government influence. And I think that's worth noting. The majority of people said, no, hey, we don't. Well, actually, that's not true. It was about half and half. Half the people said, yes, breaking up big tech, period. There's no ulterior motive. And that was by Steve. I don't believe that. I think there is an ulterior motive for wanting to break up big tech. For conservatives, it's a way to maintain their TV empires. And for Democrats, it's, well, that it's something that they can say is for democracy, I suppose, or it's so that they can actually censor people in real time. Stephen mentions, I don't care for the wording. It implies that government interference in business is appropriate unless it enriches someone you do not like. Government should break up no legitimate businesses. And, well, the reason why I phrase the question this way is because that adds a new spin to it. If Tucker Carlson is canned and he's using big tech, then that should... Perhaps that has some impact on whether or not people think that we should break up big tech. But really, what I wanted to further highlight is that the wording is supposed to imply that the main leaders in the crusade against big tech was actually doing so to stop competition. TV networks don't want to compete with other smaller producers like me, other smaller groups on Twitter, other streamers, so they want to break up big tech. And you know, people are saying it's a weird way to word the question, but if it's giving Tucker a platform, big tech, isn't that important? Does that change your mind? Cynthia mentioned, are his intentions pure? Since I was finally listening to Tucker, Murdoch is not high on my favorite list, for sure. I don't think he presumably should be. Hey, thank you all to the new people joining. We're just talking about big tech, and I guess, well, hey, good to hear from you, Wendy. Good to see you on YouTube. Basically, what I was asking is, should we break up big tech? And part of the reason why I wanted to ask that is because people like Tucker will rely on big tech after he was canned from big TV. He will rely on big tech to get all these videos and views. Does that change your mind? Now, and it's crazy. Tucker spent all this time lobbying against quote unquote big tech. And now that he's been kicked off Fox News, now he's probably going to rely on his own streaming service that will be based on big tech. That's worth observing or talking about, right? So hey, but I'm interested in hearing what you guys have to say. No, Wendy, I'm not against Tucker. I'm just merely saying that somebody like Tucker would call for the breakup of big tech until they have to rely on big tech to promote their business. Where when Tucker was at Fox News and had they broken up big tech, and then he was kicked off of Fox News, his platform and reach would be much smaller than what it currently is. And that's worth noting. He should be able to admit and acknowledge that. And another comment I mentioned, I think the differentiating factor isn't the existence of big tech in the platform itself, but rather their business practices. Well, yeah, for sure. It's not great, but the business practices of televised news isn't great either. What's so great about the business practice of televised news? They show kids dying in school shootings to drive up ads. They support prolonged lockdowns so that way people have nothing to do but watch the news. Like, what if you're going to say big tech has bad business practices, what are you going to say about CNN or Fox News that broadcast mass shootings 24 hours all day, each day? Oh, this person was bombed, this person was killed. That's not a good business practice, is it? Is that a better business practice than what Google or Facebook do? I don't think so. Wendy said, I heard he was offered 25 million from OAN. I do not watch the news. Yeah, I don't think most people should. It's not that informative to start with. It rarely ever informs anybody of anything. And moreover, if they do inform anybody of anything, they don't really thoroughly analyze what's going on or have much of a thoughtful discussion, and that's a problem. That's right. So why I don't watch TV and I research on my own 100%, as I think more people should do. I know that you are very diligent about that. Wendy. Matt asked, in a world where your preferred candidate that may be loses or doesn't, who would be your second choice for the GOP nomination? And hey, what a question. For a lot of people are on, they believe DeSantis is the second choice, with actually most people's second choice is Ramas. Well, a lot of people, forgive me, other than DeSantis, is Ramaswamy. And Stephen mentioned Rand Paul, even though Stephen is a libertarian. That's a good question to ask, Matt. I think basically when he mentioned I want President Trump, I do not think DeSantis will put his hat in the ring. I think DeSantis will put his hat in the ring. I don't know, but I think he will, and I think he has a good reason to. I think that healthy debate and competition between two candidates is good, and to not have two strong candidates actually means that the whole nation is robbed of the opportunity to see who's going to emerge as the best candidate, and that's consequential. This idea that Republicans should just trot out somebody like Democrats did with Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton in non-competitive races, that's contrary to what people believe the party should stand for. Well, yeah, DeSantis is going to pull 20 points below Trump because he hasn't totally started campaigning yet. He has a lot of work in Florida that he's wrapping up. One person mentioned that DeSantis has done about 4 legislative sessions worth of work in Florida this session. So he's trying to accomplish a lot of things in his home state. Trump, because he is not currently in office, doesn't have to do that. So of course he's going to pull a little bit ahead, and I don't think even people are really even thinking about what's going on, right? Are people really thinking about the presidential debate? Heck, let's ask this: are news stations talking about it? Is there any real debate? Is there a lot of substantive discussion about the viability of either candidates? No. So of course Trump's going to run ahead for a while until we actually have a race. Well, yeah, of course you are, Wendy. You're a very diligent person. That's why we're so happy to have you on here. But most people aren't really thinking about it, and there's a lot to emerge, and there's a lot to discuss and talk about. And moreover, I think both candidates have questions that they have to answer. And I think the debate stage is the best opportunity for the candidates of whomever, hopefully it's at least two strong candidates where those questions can be answered. Now, sticking with the theme here on our discussion group in Talk Politics, saying social media is a better means of sharing information than television, even if some stories wrongly get labeled false information. And everybody, well, not everybody, but looks like 28 voters to 1 agreed that social media is a better means of sharing information than television, even if some stories wrongly do get labeled false information. So the reason why I wanted to ask this question is because, again, so many are on breaking up big tech, and they think that that's a great idea, but most people think that social media is a better means of sharing information. So that would impede people's ability to share information with each other. That's consequential. Hey, thank y'all for those who are just joining. We're just taking the pulse of the people in our public talk politics Facebook discussion group. We're talking about social media, and the question that was being asked is, or what we were discussing is, social media is a better means of sharing information than TV. Yeah, Wendy, most people do prefer social media to television, even when some stories are wrongly labeled false information. Well, yeah, hey, thank y'all for joining. We're just talking about social media and if it's better than TV in terms of sharing information. Yeah, I don't believe it. I wouldn't believe anything anybody says in general, not just on TV or social media, but in general. That's why I do my own research to reach my own conclusion. But most people, 28 people, think, compared to 1, I think that social media is better than TV for sharing information. And it's just so ironic because people will also lobby to break up big tech. Okay, if we break up big tech, what convenient way are we going to have to share information? Wouldn't that further empower the government to give us more propaganda than what we actually need? Bill mentioned most TV media is biased and has an agenda 100%. And I think a lot of social media posts do too, but you can hide bad news in social media. It's harder to hide on TV. And moreover, TV's more likely to exploit you for fear-based watching. When you get on Fox News or CNN and there's a tragedy that happens for them and their advertisers mind, oh, hey, this is awesome because we're going to get big ratings because there was a big shooting that we can run for 24 hours. That doesn't happen on social media, and I think that's note. Bill mentioned big pharma controls TV with advertising. Well, then that could be true, Bill. But what I'm really trying to drive home is that for the people who want to break up big tech and include social media under that umbrella, most people like social media better than TV, and yet people aren't saying break up TV. So how does that make any sense? Shouldn't people have a more accurate narrative on this? Or moreover, shouldn't politicians really be better attuned to what people actually think? People think that social media is better than TV, and yet they just hammer on breaking up big tech. Seems dishonest and wrong to me, right? Or you guys have a different conclusion? Hey, thank you all for joining, talking about big tech. And well, yeah, so it's a good question to ask. people like social media better than TV, even though politicians insist otherwise. Pretty crazy, right? I think so. We got some new members. We thank them for joining us live every 8:30 to participate in ongoing discussion. But hey, here is the question of the night, the heavyweight battle, Donald Trump and debating. Donald Trump said that he doesn't need to debate because he's way ahead in the polls. Do you think not debating is a good idea? We talked a little bit about this at the top of the show, and we talked about how it's 24, and we need to hear from candidates and where they stand now. And that actually happens to be the consensus. Almost everybody said that no, it's not a good idea for Donald Trump to not participate in debates. And well, right, I agree with that. When Trump has to debate, and he should. It's just so interesting because he is actually, when it comes to not debating, Donald Trump is actually going to be on CNN. Donald Trump said CNN was the enemy of the people. So how does that work? Is CNN the enemy of the people or not? If it was the enemy of the people, then why is Donald Trump going on CNN? Is CNN now good? Is TV now good? These are questions that ought to be asked before we just say, oh, well, this is a great thing. Yeah, right, CNN. Oh my goodness, for sure. The CNN was once the enemy of the people, but now that Trump doesn't like Fox News, now it's good for him to come on. And hey, and at the very least, regardless of what you think about the gentleman or not, we all ought to be able to admit that that's not really consistent. And that doesn't seem to be good. And moreover, is anybody talking about this fact then that he's not debating, and then also going back to CNN that he called the enemy of the people? Bill mentioned it might be a new strategy. Well, yeah, if Trump's new strategy is to go on CNN and now say that CNN's good, oh yeah, perhaps that's a strategy, but that doesn't discredit the idea that he called them the enemy of the people. Are they the enemy of the people or not? If they are the enemy of the people, then should we be partnering with more people we consider our enemies? Should I go into a radical Sierra Club meeting and say, oh, hey guys, thanks for letting me speak to you? I mean, maybe it would be good camaraderie, but I just don't think that seems to lack integrity. Kathleen mentioned, regardless of poll numbers, a candidate needs to show the country that he can clearly discuss the issues in the country and have a plan to work on those things. There are things Americans should look for in a candidate rather than little issues that don't matter as much. Focus on issues and not drama. Yeah, right. I think there's a lot of truth. Truth to that. Another commenter mentioned it's a symbiotic relationship. Trump needs to bash CNN in public for his base, and CNN needs Trump to be relevant to get ratings. Well, yeah, 100%. But that really highlights the corruption, right? Politicians complain about politicians until they're actually politicians. Those same politicians complain about CNN until they're politicians, and now everything changes. Okay, well, I'm a politician. I like the establishment. The establishment likes me. Well, doesn't seem to have a whole lot of integrity. Even if that is what's going on, that seems to fundamentally lack integrity. Either they're the enemy of the people or not. And maybe the enemy of the people line was a little bit of rhetoric, but why do people take it so seriously? I mean, it seems kind of crazy to me. But hey, we'll get to that question tomorrow morning. Make sure to vote in that poll tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Matt wrote, someone should remind Trump how Iowa went in 2016 when he didn't show up. Josh mentioned we need debate in our current society. Bill mentioned Pence was on CNN. Oh, okay, right. So if Donald Trump is following what Pence is doing, and that must mean that he agreed with the lockdowns, because it was Pence who was the architect of the lockdown strategy that was based on communist information. The United States government decided to lock down on the basis of COVID numbers that were coming from China. we're we're supposed to hate China, but then we have to love them because they lock down, so we have to lock down too. Crazy. Oh, yes, okay. It is President Trump, not Trump. I'm not saying that to be disrespectful. I mean, just shooting the breeze. I actually mentioned on the idea of whether or not Trump should debate. Whether it's strategic, it's a different consideration than whether it's respectable. There's nothing worse than the treatment PA voters received from House Fetterman when he agreed to a measly 1 hour debate at the 11th hour. Trump is wildly off base and robbing voters. Right. We already went through the basement I refuse to debate moment, both with Biden and Fetterman. And now that's okay. I mean, is the standard, or do we just make things up as we go and hope that people aren't paying attention? And I think that's why programs like these are so important, because we're the only program holding politicians and people accountable. Well, sure. Yes, I understand what you're saying, Wendy. Wendy said that's where Biden will be campaigning. He barely campaigned for 2020 election. He had to release campaign videos about his campaign instead of live performances. And what he mentioned, Dems don't care. They just want a yes or no person in that seat. Well, I think if a president doesn't want to debate, then that indicates that they might be a yes or no person and just taking orders from somebody else. Let's get people out there and see how they act spontaneously on the fly, instead of taking orders from people. Should I do the debate? Should I not? Am I allowed to? No, let's get that. If people love Trump and Trump loves his voters, then he should do what helped him get to where he was, which was debating. That's where people have so many fond memories, Donald Trump. And that's where a lot of people thought that he was most confident. Why can't he do that again? Why, I don't understand. Yeah, oh yeah. Bill mentioned Shapiro was in the basement also. Now, Sarah mentioned Democrats are not having debates and are able to focus on general election, while Republicans are going to spend millions of dollars in a primary when we already know the winner. Well, do we know the winner? I think that's a fair question to ask. Donald Trump himself, when he was campaigning, it was said that he had a 99.9% chance to lose to Hillary Clinton. So I don't know if anybody can take any election for granted. And she also mentions, from a political strategy perspective, why not use Republican energy on winning general election, come up with the strategy to get enough ballots to combat the strategy of the left machine? Well, what I don't understand about this is how we could have a political strategy if we don't even know what the person we're strategizing around stands for. How are we going to find out what somebody stands for if they won't debate? How are we going to see how they interact with in a hot, contested environment? We don't. When he says, "I don't think he's going to do that," he was upset because the moderator. Well, yeah, Trump can be upset about moderators and how some of that's unfair, but in politics, the best things are when people overcome things that are unfair. Donald Trump himself, in the beginning, when he was running, was able to overcome a lot of the bias that existed in the media, and that's why people were so fond of him. So to think that a moderator is going to throw things up, people should be able to overcome that. If this was a football game, for example, and a ref threw a flag that people thought was controversial, the coach would tell his team, "Hey, you guys still have to win, even if all these flags are being thrown. We have to overcome that." That's what they teach in sports. That's what I would assume people should be teaching in politics, instead of going on about, well, I'm going to have this grievance. Well, yes, maybe your grievance is legitimate, but why not overcome it? Why can't people overcome their own limitations and insist on it? I think that's important. But I also wanted to point out that Trump does really still have a lot to prove. He struggles with civility, hasn't explained how he's going to reach independence, and he hasn't justified much of his policy, including making no changes to the broken Social Security system. So we, as an American people, deserve answers on those things. Is he going to be civil enough to maintain a Republican Congress? Is he going to explain to us how it's possible that he will be able to win independence? And is he going to explain why we can't change the broken Social Security system? Because if we don't make changes 10 years from now, that the system is going to automatically cut people's benefits by 20%. And so to just throw your hands up in there and say that it's not going to work and that we have to pass the buck, that's not the sort of leadership that I think anybody thinks we need. We need somebody to really help the public understand bad policy. Trump mentions Trump and DeSantis need to appeal to more independent, moderate Democrats. And I think that's true, Bill. And I think we're not going to understand what their plan is to do so if they don't have a debate. I don't think that question is going to be asked on Trump's CNN event, but it should be. But he owes people an explanation of how that's going to happen. It's certainly not going to it's not going to happen by using nasty language to attack people. Trump just doesn't have a path to victory with nasty language. People are sick of it. And of course, our current president, while he doesn't use nasty language, and most of his language use is quite poor, he's now proactively upsetting people. And there is something of a virtue to that, something that can really be appreciated. Mark mentioned people who blindly follow Trump should think about what he can accomplish when people from both sides of the aisle hate him. I backed him when we have way better choices now, but buy back DeSantis, for example. Bill mentioned that. That's why they need to go on liberal channels. They can't do a Mastriano that caters to his own. All very, very insightful comments. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Ryan said, name any incumbent in any race anywhere in America who debates with primary competitors 30 to 40 points behind in every poll. It doesn't happen. Don't fall for the conservative media, which wants the ratings. The primary is over, on to the general election. And I said, well, okay, if that's the case, then nobody should have allowed Trump to debate in 2016 because he never held office. And all those other people were pulling so far ahead of him, they shouldn't debate it, right? That's not a standard. And heck, even if it is the case that somebody's polling 30 to 40 points ahead of somebody, they should still do enough to respect that other person to let them debate and let the people make that choice. And if they're afraid of that, then that's not noble. That's not good. To me, that's pathetic. I believe we should have debates no matter what the circumstances. And if people don't like it, then the people don't like it, and people don't watch or people don't vote for that candidate. But politicians have to be better about that, and be better about supporting free speech in general instead of just hiding from debates. We have a media and politicians that would rather hide from people than to go out and try to earn their vote by being sensible and saying intelligent things. And that's pathetic. It's pathetic. Bill mentioned Trump hatred was created by the fake news, 96% negative coverage. Well, yeah, that's a lot of that's true. But in a lot of cases, Trump invited that negative criticism and still continues to do so. Donald Trump implied about DeSantis some really nasty things, Bill, that I'm not going to get into in this stream. But if that's the kind of tactic he's going to rely on, then that's not going to win people over in the future. and people get a little bit sick of it. People don't like nasty talk. Now, Sarah mentions Trump wasn't ever up in 30 points, yeah, which was my point. But anyhow, the thing that I wanted to point to was that if Trump doesn't debate, then it's the political equivalent of a football team leaving midway through the game because they're ahead at the half. Just imagine if when the Patriots were down to the Falcons, I think it was what 28-3 or something of that nature at halftime. The Falcons said, "Oh well, we're not going to come out here and play because we're already up." Well, that's the sort of attitude that they had, and they ultimately lost. The reason why you play the game is to find out what the results are and what's really going on and who's better. And if we just insist that we're not going to play the game, then that seems hubristic. It's the same thing that Hillary did. Hillary said that Hillary took her election for granted. That's why she didn't campaign. That's a little being too full of oneself to say, "Oh, well, I'm so ahead, I don't got to campaign anymore. I don't got to talk to people. I can just say nasty things about the other candidate on Truth Social." No, I don't think that. I don't think that's it. Well, yeah, Bill, the Democrats talk nasty all the time for sure. But just because that's their standard and they're going to have gutter standards, that doesn't mean you have to. I don't. That's a common. And Bill mentions the elections of war. That's why Jeb Bush didn't win. He wasn't a fighter. I don't think elections are wars. And if it is, that's indicative of the degree to which we've let them be quote unquote wars. They don't have to necessarily be like that. They can be civil with precise language that doesn't imply that other people are doing disgusting things, which is what Trump did about DeSantis, and that's not justified. There has to be a line when it comes to civility, and some of the things that he said about DeSantis is far below those lines. And even if you want to stand up for the former president on the basis of policy, fine enough, but there has to be some line in the sand about what's suitable language. And some of the things he said about DeSantis is not suitable. Well, yeah, but you can't perform, Bill, if you're going to be using language that alienates people. And Trump, when Trump alienated people, which you have to acknowledge that he does, Bill, he cost Purdue and Loeffler their seats in Georgia, and that helped enable the Biden spending plan. So to say, well, it's about performance. Okay, his performance was he took Jeff Sessions out of the seat, and then Jeff Sessions was replaced by a Democrat. There was 2 major elections in Georgia. He told people to stay home because it's fake. That enabled the Biden spending plan. That's not a result, and that's a direct result of a personality problem that renders him ineffective. Right? I mean, thanks for joining. We're just talking about whether or not Donald Trump should debate DeSantis. Bill and I were kind of mixing it up in the chat here. We were talking about some of the just disgusting things Trump has been saying and using in terms of language and civility. Bill mentioned Bezos is a miserable guy and Amazon thrives. Amazon workers are treated terrible. Yeah, for sure, Bill. But we can't, and we're not going to win statewide if it becomes the case that the Republican Party is the party of people who say disgusting, awful things. That's just not going to work. Trump will do nothing but divide the party even more. It will be a disaster. Somebody mentioned time to have all candidates debate, and I think that's true. I think there should be debates from representatives of all and in it any party. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. I think if Republicans believe in competition, then they ought to have more frequent debates, and they ought to let more people debate. But perhaps they don't believe in competition. I suppose they don't know. Jessica mentions, yeah, Donald Trump's way ahead in the polls, and so was Hillary Clinton. Interesting point. It's exactly right. And I think that's why there should be a debate. Iron sharpens iron, so to say, and neither candidate will be all that sharp if they refuse to debate one another. Bill mentions the media creates narrative for debate. As a result, candidates can't get their message through to the people. We already know Trump's policies. Sure. Yes, we know some have Trump's policies, but even then, he still has questions to answer via a debate about his character, about the future of our country, how he's going to be more effective. There's lots of interesting questions that are not just about his actual policy that he should answer for. Politicians need to have answers. This idea that we need to sit around and let politicians tell us what to do and how to do anything, and we can't be a good person unless somebody gets on the TV and tell us what to do, that's ridiculous. We should have the opportunity to hold them accountable and know more about them by having them answer questions. Fundamentally. Bill mentions parties already divided. Trump and DeSantis have very similar policies. Bill, how do we know if Trump and DeSantis have similar policies? Have they debated on that matter? Has either really put forth the policy agenda in which they're honestly going to campaign on? Because if they have, I haven't seen it. And two, even if they do have similar policies, Bill, how are they going to be effective in implementing those policies? That's something that they have to answer so we can hold them accountable. Those answers haven't been given because those questions aren't even asked yet. Right? Somebody mentioned what has ever happened for the good of the country. It's a good question. So it's a good question. Who knows, right? Yeah, we should have answers. We should have debates so we know what for the good of the country is. Fundamentally, how do we know who's better for the country if nobody will answer that question? Right. So it's worth having that discussion. The consensus is that nobody thinks it's a good idea to skip debates. Yeah, no, some parts of evil society win, though, for sure. So hey, that is that. We also have a discussion. Well, I basically tried to reframe the question because in one case somebody kind of made it seem like I'm just going after Trump, when actually what I think is both presumptive Republican presidential frontrunners, Trump and DeSantis, have matters that they should address as candidates before either is anointed as the nominee. Shouldn't they answer questions? Isn't answering questions good? Isn't that a laudable thing? I think so. I think, and heck, it's not just with Trump or DeSantis, but it would be for anybody. There's so many different things going on in the world that we are owed candid answers. I think a lot of times, and the whole reason why I'm doing this show is because a lot of times politicians don't answer questions and they lie and they hide and they weasel their way out of it. And as Americans, we can just say no to that. We can say we're not going to let that happen. But if we just normalize the basement campaigns, then that's not going to happen. And then we're all robbed and made worse off. Bill mentioned absolutely, for example, nationwide concealed carry. Yeah, right. That would be an interesting thing worth debating. Bill mentioned that's the Democrats' evil lawlessness society. Look at the cities. Well, some cities aren't. I guess it really depends on the cities, but it's very difficult to pinpoint when crime breaks out and how that happens. It's not as easy as people think. And actually, I think that's an issue that most Republicans just don't, and you guys can disagree with this take, but most Republicans just don't understand it. They think that if we just arrest more people in the inner city, that things are magically going to get better. And that's just not true. It's just not true, particularly if a lot of the people are being arrested are somebody's father and they're going to be separated from their kids. that's only going to make matters worse. And I'm not saying that some people don't deserve to be separated from their kids, but I'm saying it's a lot more complicated. But anyhow, so, in terms of both candidates answering questions, so I mentioned only two people can be Republican nominee. He supports DeSantis because of youth, 2 terms, and more electable and more principled. Bill mentions Trump will be in at least 2 debates. The new candidates have to be in all debates. They have to prove themselves. Well, to think that Trump doesn't have to prove himself, that's not totally right. Yes, he won one election, but DeSantis has actually won more elections than Trump has. Why shouldn't Trump have to answer more questions? Because DeSantis answered more. DeSantis won when he was in Congress, and he also won 2 terms as governor. So shouldn't Trump answer more questions because he's won less? And moreover, Trump didn't win with as wide of a margin as DeSantis did. Shouldn't Trump have to prove himself for that? This idea that he has special privilege because people like him is absurd. Politicians have to answer questions. They have to be comfortable answering questions. So regardless of whom it is, regardless of whether it's Trump, regardless of whether it's Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Bill Clinton, whomever, they have an obligation to answer as many questions as possible. And I don't think that the American people should relent on that. They should ask for more debates and more candid debates with better questions. Stephen mentioned GOP voters know exactly what stands these 2 Republican candidates are making. He thinks neither are going to come within 8 to 10 points of Biden. I don't believe that. But I don't think that GOP voters really know where DeSantis or Trump stand on all the issues. Off the top of my head, I can name some policy DeSantis supports or had supported. Does he support it now? Does he support those policies on a federal level? I don't know. And the only policy that I know Trump supports is building the wall. That's one policy. That's a simple one policy. Well, listen, some people don't want a career politician, but maybe I don't think there's anything wrong with quote unquote career politicians. It's no different than having a career in any other profession. If you choose to be a politician and that's your profession, then that's your profession. That's not any different than being a doctor or a cop. We don't say I don't want career cops, or hey, I don't want career doctors, because career doctors, once they're in there, they get corrupt and lazy. We don't say that. Like that's not a totally valid thing. Somebody mentioned where the ethics and morals come to play when we need to look deeper. Well, I think that is one question, ethics and morals, that does come into play, and those are the sorts of questions that should be answered in a debate. How are we going to know what their view of the world is in terms of ethics if they don't debate? We can have town halls, but town halls are lower stakes. That's not the same. That's not competitive. It's not the quote unquote arena. Mark mentions Republicans will not wake up and get involved. The Democrats have eaten Republicans' lunch since 2016 because they outwork Republicans. I think there's a lot of truth to that, Mark. I think there's a lot of truth to that Republicans don't come to grips with. In a lot of cases, many Republicans, the ones who are most upset about losses are the ones who didn't knock doors for a candidate, didn't make calls for a candidate, didn't go out and do anything for a candidate other than let the TV tell them what to do and what to think, and that's a problem. Wendy mentioned Biden is a career politician for 50 years but has nothing to show for it. Well, yeah, the problem with Biden isn't that he's a career politician, though. Politics is a noble profession, and noble people largely enter it. I know Congressman Scott Perry's a noble guy. That's a lot of people I met in politics are noble people, and actually I think it does damage to our political discourse when we just insist that politicians are sinister people. They're not. They're normal people who have a particular skill in like being around people and thinking about things and solving problems, and there's nothing wrong with that. But we were talking about, do we really know where DeSantis and Trump stand? Stephen says Don stands for his brand of anti-elite, using primary Democratic levers like tariffs and halting immigration. Ron owns the anti-woke field. That's all they have. This version of politics is less about ideas and more about emotions and building anxiety. I think there is some truth to that. But we don't know what Trump or DeSantis think that they stand for, because neither have totally told us what it is that they stand for. They're running a campaign. Great. What do you stand for? We don't know because we don't want to talk to anybody. You know, forgive me. Wendy said you don't believe in term limits. No, term limits that's something that lobbyists invented. Okay, we'll go on this brief sidebar about term limits, but term limits is an idea that lobbyists invented to take politicians out of power to put lobbyists in power. California has term limits, and of course, that's so radically far left, and that's because the politicians there have no clue what the heck's going on, because they move from one political office to another. They don't know what's happening, and the only people that keep track of what's going on are lobbyists. And term limits, people, it's actually, the term isn't a term limit, it's a term restriction, or government mandated term restrictions, which I don't believe. That's just as anti-competitive as the government breaking up businesses that they don't think. I don't support that. So I didn't respond to this comment from Stephen, and I should. But he mentions more about what Trump is for. Troy just mentions we need to hear from candidates on both sides where they stand on each issue. And that's that. So yeah, there's lots to think about. And a lot of stuff that's worth noting there. Bill mentions, I know everything DeSantis stands for. He pushed it through in Florida, and I agree with all of it. Well, yeah, that's true. But what you stand for in Florida, you might not stand for nationally. And so that's just another reason why it's important to debate. We just don't have enough information, or the best information, because we don't have the opportunity to ask as many questions as possible. In our last part of Close to the People, what do you value most in a candidate running for federal office? Electability, ideology, something else, grassroots organization. The main choices were electability and ideology, which to me is somewhat concerning, because somebody can say that I have this ideology, and that ideology may not be committed to solving problems, and an ideology might be a way of not thinking as thoughtfully about problems. And I'll give you this example. Let's say that I'm an old school conservative, and I say, well, my ideology is that I'm the most conservative person on planet Earth, and as a result, I think that we should lock every criminal up for as long as possible, because that's what conservatives do, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to lock people up. Well, okay, that's kind of neat, I guess, that you're saying that, but is that really thinking thoughtfully about the problem? No. Sometimes our ideology can stop us from digging deeper into individual problems that are perhaps worth investigating. I think we should try to rely less on ideology and think more specifically about individual issues to come up with the best solution. It shouldn't be totally about our ideology. Bill mentions Yeah, extremists don't win. And Bill mentioned DeSantis and Trump debate and all the other candidates will be a personality debate, not policy. And the moderator creates chaos. Yes, there could be some trouble in the debate, Bill, but it's still something that we're owed. It's still something that we should see. But yeah, and Mark mentions term limits. There are already term limits. And he says Republicans won't get off the couch. And he said here locally they won't caucus, go to meetings, or call reps out. And this is how we end up with bad candidates. Well, I think another way we end up with bad candidates is just believing when a candidate says, "Oh, my ideology is conservative. I'm the most conservative," and then you ask them, "Okay, what does that mean?" And they don't want to explain it, or they don't have any concrete details. I think ideology can be dangerous because it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut to thinking, right? But I'm interested in hearing what it is then that you guys think. Should we have candidates be even more ideological than what it was that they are now or were before? Let me know in the chat. I don't know if I agree with that. I think if a candidate can articulate a point of view, that's good. But to just be committed to an ideology seems, you know, it just doesn't seem totally. It just doesn't sit right with me. I don't know totally why. You guys can tell me why I'm wrong in the chat. I'd be happy to hear about that. But I do want to cover some other things here about the national news and some of the nonsense that continues to go into that, and some things that we should probably really just think about. One thing that I'll talk about is the Second Amendment. That's what's coming up next. We'll get into a discussion of the Second Amendment. We'll talk about how government intervention is pushing Russia and China closer together. We'll talk about free market healthcare, the minimum wage, the decline of the US dollar, and New York City banning stoves. We'll do all that here in a second. But in the meantime, make sure to check out our Etsy store. Got a lot of great merchandise. I hadn't mentioned anything about that yet. But make sure to go to etsy.com/talking politics so you can get some cool stuff. You see those mugs? You could have one. That would contribute to our ability to reach even more people. It's hard to reach people as a small streamer without your guys' support, because I, of course, am not Fox News. I'm not Tucker yet. I'm not Rupert Murdoch. I don't have any way of reaching out to as many of those people. But anytime that you guys make a purchase, I reinvest that into advertising the show and growing the group and doing all that. Yeah, so etsy.com/shop/talking politics. It should be in the chat here. Tell me if you can see it right there in the chat. That helps. Right there, etsy.com/shop/talking politics. Again, that helps us reach even more people. The coolest thing, we got a mug. It says, "Forget football. My Super Bowl is the next election." Isn't that cool? Thanks, Bill, for getting one of these mugs in the past. Thanks, Monica, Pete, Matt, Liz, for getting these mugs. Hey, pretty cool, right? Our Super Bowl's the next election. We don't need in sports. In the meantime, though, we will go to national news and nonsense coming up here in a minute. So we're at it. Second Amendment. When he says leave our Second Amendment alone, guns are not the problem. Well, think about this. Why do federal bureaucrats need so much firepower? Every year, it seems, people like the IRS are getting more weapons. Since 2006, 103 federal agencies have spent $3.7 billion on guns and military-style equipment. Isn't that cool? That the same people that will say, "Hey, guns are dangerous, but we need bureaucrats to have $3.7 billion worth of guns. And of those 103 agencies, 27 are traditional law enforcement entities. So you have groups like the EPA, the IRS, and Department of Health and Human Services buying more guns. When you mention people who commit crimes with a gun will get them illegally. Well, in this case, it's quite possible that agents of the government could commit crime with guns and get those guns, I guess, legally. But it does seem a little bit hypocritical, right? There are now more federal agents with arrest and firearm authority than U.S. Marines. So when we're out of Marines, we're gonna convert IRS agents to be our Marines, since they have more weapons. The IRS in particular has spent $35.2 million on guns and ammo since 2006. Yeah, the IRS just receives billions of dollars worth of money, and it looks like they're all buying guns. Isn't that rich? Hey, we're tired of gun violence, but we're gonna buy the IRS some new guns for Christmas this year. Yeah, boy. And $45.7 billion in enforcement. Yeah. So I don't know. Bill mentioned Democrats say guns are dangerous. They want to control us by taking away our guns. Communist tactics. Well, right, Bill, but shouldn't Democrats be alarmed that the Environmental Protection Agency is buying guns? Shouldn't Democrats be, we'll say, up in arms that the Department of Health and Human Services are buying guns? Is that a problem or not? To me, it would seem problematic. If you don't want guns, why are you having the government buy so many? I think if we're going to buy guns, we should prohibit the Environmental Protection Agency from having guns. Let's stop people from the IRS having guns first. Actually, shouldn't those guys? If people want gun control, why not control the government's guns? Why does the IRS need guns? That's a question I'd like to have answered here. Well, why do you guys think that the IRS needs guns and you don't? 75,000 on ammunition in 2022 for the IRS. Every single IRS agent, special agent, gets $345 in ammunition per year. Boy, isn't that cool? So, I don't understand. Yeah, right. I think if anybody should feel threatened about somebody having guns in a lot of cases, it's the government. Because when the government murders somebody with a gun, at least if they're in law enforcement isn't usually held accountable for killing people. And at least not here in the state of Pennsylvania. In the state of Pennsylvania, you can murder somebody with Crohn's disease, and if you're part of the Pennsylvania State Police, you can murder somebody with Crohn's disease. You can let them die on the floor, not have a pulse for 10 minutes, and then just drive off. And you can retire. You get a pension after you just killed somebody at home. So law enforcement's allowed to kill people, and with impunity if it's corrupt, and yet we want to give them more weapons. Yeah, very, very troubling. Bill mentioned no, because the government's communist, they control the people. Why people vote this way, I don't know. Well, Bill, I don't think anybody knows that $3 billion was spent on guns since 2006. I don't think anybody knows about this, but if Democrats want to start with gun control, let's start with the IRS and making sure that they're not buying $75,000 worth of, or no, forgive me, $700,000 worth of ammo. Wouldn't that be a good place to start? Is with the government? I think so. NATO. So our good friendly friends at NATO are they're actually putting a base out in Japan, which could further push tensions with Russia and Ukraine to be greater. So there's a grave risk that moving NATO into Asian affairs is likely to bring Russia and China even closer together into what could be a de facto alliance. Well, isn't that great? Good old NATO, which its expansion helped start the current war that Democrats seem to be all too fond of funding. They're going to get on over in Asia and try to make Russia and China a greater threat than what they already are. If that's not incompetence, I don't know what is, but it's important to know what's going on internationally because most people don't. It's hard for us to follow all this. Bill mentioned government wants lawsuits because they are judges, which are also employed by the government, for sure. We just got a note here: Republicans want, or voters want Republicans to reduce healthcare costs, and they want us to support the Americans for Prosperity Plan, personal option, instead of Medicare for all or public option. They want choice in healthcare. Telehealth, health savings accounts, those are popular. It's a poll that was conducted on behalf of AFP. AFP has a plan for healthcare because members of the party typically don't. The GOP hadn't had a plan before. There is a plan now. If Republicans win the House, they should support personal option. That would mean that instead of having to rely on insurance to get access to healthcare, you could go to a doctor for a cheaper cost. You could use telemedicine to reduce costs, or you could have health savings accounts which go untaxed and let you use that in case of an emergency. 100% important. Next thing, minimum wage real quick. This is so fascinating. I just came across a study not that long ago. There is a new study released, National Bureau of Economic Research, that refutes the claim that minimum wage increases reduce poverty. In fact, a 10% increase in the minimum wage is associated with a statistically insignificant 0.17% increase in the probability of longer run poverty among all purposes. So, and they even cite prior evidence suggesting large poverty reducing effects of the minimum wage are highly sensitive to researchers' choice of macroeconomic controls, meaning that the studies about minimum wage that were conducted before by economists was fudged, and driven by specifications that limit counterfactuals to geographically proximate states. So more fudgery. And then when you look at after the Great Recession era, where states increased minimum wage, there was no conclusion that said that there was poverty reducing effects of doing that. And yet that's a Democrat priority. Bill mentioned we are providing health care for everyone crossing the border. Healthcare is a free for all. Oh, yeah, right. Part of the reason why that's happening, Bill, though, is because so much of health insurance healthcare goes through insurance or government. And it's the government that's able to administer those things. If we let people have more choice, people would be able to better choose, right? Their healthcare provider instead of getting tied up in bureaucracy that in some ways favors people who weren't born here. Then, of course, the New York government are indeed banning gas stoves. So we were told that no, Democrats don't want to ban gas stoves. Well, actually, they do. They did create a new program in Albany where they are actually trying to ban stoves. Now, fortunately, in Pennsylvania, there's legislation that would stop us from ever being able to ban gas stoves. Mark mentioned Walmart can afford to pay $20 an hour. Small businesses can't. Think about it for sure. But yeah, we got the Democrats banning air gas stoves. Important to note. And then lastly, just thinking about the world and the global economy, this article is interesting because it highlights that when a lot of United States power in the world came from the strength of the dollar. And on the basis of that strength, we were able to be a lot more effective internationally in setting things up in our favor than just using military force. We have military force across the globe. It's actually harming us, particularly because countries are going to move away from the dollar. The United States may have a powerful military, but its true strength lies in the value and status of its currency. So the United States is the world reserve currency. It also gives the U.S. an advantage to keep interest on debt low, which for now is the case, but it probably won't be in the future. Since the end of World War II, U.S. held exorbitant privilege. From destruction of war came America's rise, and with it, the acquisition of most of the world's gold reserves and half the world's GDP. And the reason why I think that this is important to talk about is because this is directly tied to our economy. As fewer people move away from the dollar, expect to see inflation, interest rates increase also. But part of the reason why these countries want to move away from the dollar is because we're putting all these economic sanctions on them, and they are tired of U.S. hypocrisy when it comes to sanctions, where the United States will penalize every other country in the world for violating some sanction. And yet when the United States business violates the same sanction, the U.S. businesses pay less. And so other countries are getting very frustrated with it. And so some in the past, European nations began discussing possibility of returning to the gold standard. And then we're seeing the decline of the dollar recently because of China. So as China is coming up as an economy, we're going down because our politicians lie about spending. They lie about social programs. They just insist on not being candid. Bill mentioned we have plenty of money for healthcare if we don't stop sending trillions to corrupt Ukraine. Well, sure, but we're not going to be effective internationally, and our economy isn't going to be able to grow the same way if we keep spending, we keep sanctions on other countries. Then other countries are going to settle on some other currency. They're not going to trade with us, and then they may escalate military tension. And that's the takeaway that I'm trying to get at here, is that the United States is really in serious trouble, particularly when the United States sanctioned Russia and then also blocked Russian money from. So there's an international banking system called the Swift dollar transfer system that the United States set up, and the US blocked Russia from doing it. So for Russia to conduct business, they had to partner with China. And so as a result of that, China and Russia are closer. More countries are considering following China and Russia in terms of currency and getting away from us. And that also runs the risk of those countries forming a military and economic alliance also. So in a 12-month period since the Russia war started, countries around the world mustered the courage to openly discuss the creation of alternative methods to conduct trade, because they're tired of the U.S. military stopping them from trade, the sanctions, all the penalties that we are imposing on other countries. And so China's testing digital currency with some countries, are encouraging Russia and Iran and Venezuela to accept other things other than the dollar for oil. And well, all of that is going to put us in a very, very bad situation. So fewer countries are going to rely on the dollar as a standard. That puts us in a bad trade position. That means we'll see higher interest rates also. Bill mentioned that nobody respects us anymore. Weak leadership equals weak country. How about Trump's policy, energy independent? That's a good policy that Trump implemented, but other people aren't going to respect us when we are stopping them from conducting business, when we are instigating wars with other countries, right? Over time, we're going to see the results and how that continues. So just wanted to put that on your guys' radar, the causes of other countries getting rid of the dollar and the political implications of that, which are going to be very severe if we don't get out of all these endless wars. You know, the people think of our foreign policy and our economic policy as being two separate things, and they're not totally. They are directly correlated and related. And so when we have bad economic policy, we're not able to be as effective with our military. In fact, if we had a stronger economy, we may not have to use our military forces much. And then also, when we have too much military intervention, that harms our economy, both in terms of cost and other countries wanting to partner with us. But I think that's important. What do you guys think? Does that make sense? Is it nonsense, junk, anything sensible? Let me know here in the comments. We'd be happy to hear from you. Well, yeah, right. High energy does drive the cost of each thing up, Bill, but it's more than that. It's also that our military intervening in so many countries will hurt our economy because other countries don't want to do business with us, and they don't want the dollar to be the currency because we are threatening them with violence. And that will further hurt the economy. And of course, that's not something that people are thinking about, because I don't know why, but it should be. So that's that. That's the end of our stream. Hey, thank you so much for joining us. And we appreciate all of you. Until next time, we'll see you next week, 8:30. Okay.